Topping is one of those companies which may not have been able to penetrate Western markets with quite the same success as perhaps the likes of FiiO, but this company actually makes some of the most respected audio components to those who are in the know. If we just look at some of their most recent products, in particular the D50S DAC and the objective measurements that it had undergone, it becomes clear that Topping is indeed incredibly capable of producing some excellent products. The A50 is a new addition to their lineup, and on paper at least, it seems to be a great little desktop headphone amp. So let's see if that's true. When looking at the A50, the first thing that it reminded me of was the Mac Mini due to the squarish profile with the rounded corners. However, the A50 doesn't just look somewhat similar to the Mac Mini, but the build quality of this unit is also exceptionally good. Weighing in at just shy of 460 grams, or about 1.01 pounds, it has a really nice heft to it, which really helps to give it that premium feeling. The outer case is machined out of a single block of aluminium, but the bottom plate can also be unscrewed, which will give you access to all of the parts inside. And yes, that does include both of the op-amp chips, so you can swap out and upgrade them if you'd like. Along the front of the A50 are all of the controls and the headphone outputs. The power button is the only button on the entire device and is also used to switch between the high and low gain. Speaking of which, there is a little LED to indicate which gain mode the amp is in. To cycle between the gain modes, you only need to press the power button once. So whilst this is simple, the problem is that it also means that you can very easily switch from low to high gain unintentionally when you attempt to turn the amp off. In order to switch the amp off, you need to hold the power button in for about 1 second. This is just something that you'll really need to be careful about. For the headphone outputs, we are given a choice of 6.5mm and 3.5mm unbalanced outputs, as well as a 2.5mm balanced output. The unbalanced outputs are capable of producing up to 1110 mW per channel into a 32 ohm load, whereas the balanced output can take things up to 2200 mW per channel into a 64 ohm load. That really is not a small amount of power, and it's especially impressive given how compact the A50 is. There are just two downsides here, with the first being the output impedance. At 4.7 ohms for the single-ended outputs and 9.4 ohms for the balanced output, this is something which might affect the frequency response of your headphones. This will of course not be much of a problem for high impedance headphones, but those ultra-low impedance IEMs could experience a significant change for better or worse, especially from the balanced output. Secondly is that there is some hiss produced when using low impedance or high sensitivity IEMs. For reference, I used the Dunu DK3001 to check this because it's got an impedance of just 13 ohms and a sensitivity of 110 decibels, and I could hear some hiss when I plugged it into the A50. It was very soft though, and I really couldn't hear any of it when playing music. Something like the Campfire Andromeda has a slightly lower impedance along with a slightly higher sensitivity, so the hiss might be a touch more noticeable through them. Lastly, there's the analog volume knob, which also feels like a quality piece of kit. It feels buttery smooth, and when I wiggle it around, there really doesn't feel like there's any amount of play in it. Over on the rear is where we find the stereo RCA inputs and outputs, as well as the input for the power adapter. The RCA jacks also feel very securely mounted, and there's practically no play in them. Unfortunately, the outputs on the back does not mean that the A50 can act as a preamp. In fact, when the amp is turned on, the RCA outputs get completely muted. Whilst this will probably not be a deal breaker for most people, I know many, and myself included, that would have liked to have a preamp function. But yeah, as far as build quality goes, the A50 is fantastic, and whilst it might not have a longer list of features, I think considering the $169 price tag, it's still perfectly acceptable. Judging the sound of an amplifier can be a pretty difficult thing to do because an amplifier really shouldn't sound like anything at all. It should just be taking the signal received from the DAC and amplifying it. In reality, however, amplifiers can alter the sound. This may be due to a couple of things, including the effects that the output impedance has on the headphones, or perhaps the amplifier produces certain types of harmonic distortion. There certainly are some very in-depth measurements that can be performed, but unfortunately none of which I can conduct myself. However, if the D50S is any indication to go by, I'm fairly confident that the A50 will measure really well, considering just how well the D50S measures. As for myself, the closest I can get to doing measurements is a simple frequency response graph. As we can see, the A50 remains almost perfectly flat from 20 to 20 kHz. It's only between about 60 and 20 Hz that it rolls the bass off by about 0.8 dB. Ideally, we'd not like for it to roll off anywhere at all, but such a relatively minor roll off is not something that bothers me. Whilst listening to the A50, it sounds exactly how I would want it to sound, as if it's not even there. When listening to binaural tracks such as those recorded and produced by Chesky Records, you really get a sense of the space in which everything was recorded and the separation between the left and right channels. The cleanliness and transparency of this amp is fantastic, essentially what you'd expect not just from an amplifier in theory, but what you'd expect from a top-of-the-line product. However, the A50 doesn't cost what you'd expect a top-of-the-shelf product to cost, does it? And that's where the exceptional value of the A50 comes in. Yes, it would have been nice if it had a few more features here and there, but taking into account the power it can deliver, the features it does have, and the great build quality, I honestly cannot see the vast majority of people ever really needing anything more than what the A50 can deliver. The $169 retail price really is extremely reasonable for what you get, but what's more is that you can find the A50 as well as the D50S DAC and the P50 linear power supply on drop.com for a very healthy discount every now and then. I'm not sure if the P50 will really give you much of a benefit, but an A50 and D50S combo for under $400 is just too good to pass up. So, if you are currently on the hunt for a nice compact headphone amp, then the A50 might be exactly what you're looking for. I will be getting the D50S at some point in the near future to complement the A50, so do keep a lookout for that review on it. Well, that's it for this review on the A50. Thank you so much for watching. Any questions and comments, leave them down below. If you've liked the video, hit that like button. That's all from me for now, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.